A few hours ago, Boris Johnson rather shamelessly attacked Sir Keir Starmer in what I think will be considered a very significant debate, particularly given the context of national unrest and the role of a former Prime Minister in public discourse during such a crisis. Johnson's comments, primarily delivered through his column in the Mail Online, focus on Starmer's handling of the far-right riots and his broader approach to immigration. And Johnson accuses Starmer being deaf to public concerns, particularly on illegal immigration, and suggesting that the Labour leader's policies or lack thereof contributed to the ongoing rest. The important thing is that the policies that have already taken place at the end of the last Conservative government to limit legal migration have broadly been extremely successful. And the issue of illegal migration, so termed illegal migration, the Suella Braverman definition in her three laws, the illegal migration law, the National Security and Borders law, and the Rwanda law, all of which need to be firmly repealed by the present government, define somebody who comes to our shores, even if they want to claim asylum, as illegal because they're using an illegal route, whereas this is in contravention of the 1951 Refugee Convention that we're still signed up to, which says that no matter what route somebody uses to come to our country, if they come to our country and demand or request asylum, we must treat that with respect. We must give them legal rights. We must process their application, and if or until that application is rejected, they are considered to be perfectly in order and legal. They only become an illegal migrant if the application is rejected and they are told to leave the country, at which point they've got a certain period of time to leave the country, to go back to their home country, or to go on to a third country. And maybe we need to consider the possibility of facilitating access to those third countries if we cannot return somebody to their home to their original home, like, for example, Iran or Afghanistan, if that in itself would prove to be too compromising. If they don't qualify for asylum in this country, they may not necessarily qualify to be returned to their home country, in which case we have to have alternatives. I think it's a very rare situation, but that's where a deal like Rwanda might possibly come in. That's definitely where a deal like the Italian deal with Albania might possibly come in. There's a broader issue about third countries. But there's also the issue about offshoring people while we process their applications. And that's also where the Italian deal with Albania comes in. The deal with Rwanda is quite different. It's spurious and outsourcing to a country that has been defined as unsafe. And we can't define it into safety simply because the Supreme Court said something which didn't align with the political discourse of the government. And I think it's interesting that the media has paid very little attention to the new law which reduced the level of legal migration. The level of legal migration has dropped by 36% in the last year, even though the new act brought in by the Conservatives only became law in March. The media has paid so little attention to this because it's not an emotive headline grabber like the visual image of the boats arriving on the beaches, which is about minuscule numbers compared to the real marked issue of a system unable to cope with population increase. But we've got to remember, a capitalist country needs migration, particularly when the birth rate is falling and people are leaving the country in their droves. We need people to manage the public services that we cannot control at the moment, and that are crying out for help and for manpower. And if we can't get them from our own people, we have to get them from abroad. So, it's an interesting problem. And if Johnson really wanted to do some good, he might address the issues about how we are going to staff the NHS, how we're going to staff our schools, how we're going to staff our police, particularly when we train up police and then throw them out of the country on some spurious visa aberration, which has happened recently, and which I covered, by the way. We've got to have a more focused and a more serviceable visa arrangement that meets the needs of our country, and that also ensures that the people who go back to their own country after they've been in this country, let's say they've been here studying, go back promoting our values because they had such a positive experience here. If we bring people into this country to educate them and then throw them out at the first opportunity, that is not going to commend us to them. We're just taking their money and running, aren't we? And that has been the policy pretty well since Theresa May, and it's foul. And we have worked very, very hard to provide services that foreign students, for example, want very badly. But actually, the numbers of foreign students has gone down dramatically. So much so that a number of the smaller universities, the less well-established universities, are facing collapse. Can we allow them to collapse? Is that the right way round? Are we going to remove a lot of subjects? Is that the right way round? What are we to do? And what are we to do when so many students have got places and then can't get visas? There are so many problems that Boris Johnson could have addressed, and he hasn't. His critique is not limited to policy, but extends to personal attacks on Starmer's leadership style. He sarcastically suggests that Starmer should pack his Factor 50 and take a holiday to reflect on his premiership, indicating that Starmer's presence during the crisis has been ineffective, if not detrimental. His remarks, such as "nothing excuses a government that seems deaf to public concerns," particularly pointed, as he argues that the government's perceived indifference is fueling public unrest. The timing and the appropriateness of Johnson's comments are central to this controversy. Johnson, who left office under a cloud, under a scandal, including the Partygate affair and the accusations of misleading Parliament, now positions himself as a critic of the current administration. His attack on Starmer is politically motivated, is unreasonable, and is beneath contempt. It aims to undermine the Labour leader's credibility during a period of national crisis, and Johnson is not elected. Johnson has retired from politics. And I think we should all be critics of Johnson's intervention and argue that it's inappropriate for a former Prime Minister to publicly attack a sitting Prime Minister, especially during a time of national crisis. Such actions undermine public confidence in the government, and they contribute to further division at a time when unity is crucial. The Labour MP Bill Esterson pointedly reminded the public that Johnson himself went on holiday during the London riots in 2011 while he was Mayor of London, contrasting this with Starmer's decision to remain in the country to manage the current crisis. Starmer is right, Johnson was wrong then, Johnson is wrong now. Furthermore, Johnson's critique of Starmer's immigration policy, particularly his ending of the Rwanda deportation scheme and the use of the Bibi Stockholm, touches on deeply contentious issues, and issues that maybe Johnson feels are personal to him. But he is no longer in the game. Immigration remains a polarising topic in the UK, with significant portions of the public holding strong opinions on both sides of the debate. But Johnson's framing of Starmer as a leader who simply doesn't care is not carried out, is not proven by the reality. Johnson is the one who went on holiday. Starmer is the one who stays. Starmer does care about illegal migration. He's just got a different view to Johnson. And Johnson's intervention risks inflaming tensions further, particularly in the light of the recent far-right violence and Johnson's alliance with some of the far-right actors. It's important to consider the broader context of Johnson's remarks. The UK is facing a severe national crisis, with far-right riots leading to widespread violence, including attacks on mosques, ethnic minorities, public institutions, and Starmer's government has condemned these actions unequivocally, with the Prime Minister labelling the riots as far-right thugs and pledging full support to the police to maintain order, and Johnson should be backing that up. Johnson's decision to criticise the government's response, while acknowledging the unacceptable nature of the violence, raises questions about the role of a former Prime Minister in such situations. Should a former leader prioritise national unity and offer constructive criticism, or is it acceptable for a former leader to engage in politically charged attacks that could deepen divisions? I think a former leader is there to prioritise national unity, to offer constructive criticism. While Boris Johnson's criticisms of Sir Keir Starmer might resonate with certain sections of the population concerned about immigration and the way that has been spun for the last 10 years since Brexit, the appropriateness of such public attacks from a former Prime Minister during a time of national crisis is simply contemptible. It's wrong. Johnson's comments are politically opportunistic, exacerbating tension rather than contributing to a constructive dialogue on how to address the unifying issues fueling the current unrest, and he is taking advantage of the absence of Parliament to create a fuss, create a headline, and feather his own nest. This is all about Johnson. It's not about Britain. And Johnson